Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. All right, let's just dive right in today because we are looking at a deeply powerful narrative titled, He Was Told He Would Never Make It, the architect of his own ending. Honestly, this whole thing is a masterclass in the mechanics of resilience. It's a story we pulled directly from our source material about a kid named Ethan and how a few fundamental mindset shifts completely altered the trajectory of his entire life. And today, we're going to break down exactly how he pulled it off.
Dad, why are we leaving our house? Just picture it. Imagine being 10 years old, standing in the doorway, clutching your old backpack, and having to ask your dad that heartbreaking question. According to the text, Ethan's father looked down at him, tried his absolute hardest to smile, but his eyes were just filled with tears. He told his young son that they weren't giving up. They were just starting over.
Chapter 1. Starting Over. The Reality of Rock Bottom.
Literally that exact same night, Ethan and his dad packed up whatever they could and moved into this tiny apartment on the complete opposite side of town. His dad had lost his job, and you guys, there was almost zero money left to their name. The physical toll of this poverty was intense. Dinners stripped down to just bread and peanut butter. Sometimes they couldn't even pay to keep the lights on, so the electricity was just turned off. But the heaviest toll was definitely emotional. The source notes that Ethan would hear his father crying quietly in the kitchen at night. And to protect his dad's dignity, this 10-year-old boy would just lie there in the dark and pretend to be asleep. It was an incredibly dark time for them.
But right in the middle of all that darkness, his dad drops this absolute gem of advice. Your situation can change, but only if you refuse to let it change who you are. This wasn't just some throwaway line to comfort a kid. No, this became the foundational thesis for Ethan's entire character development. It was the anchor he held on to during the absolute hardest moments of his youth.
Which brings us to Section 2. The voices of doubt, facing the noise. As Ethan grew up, he carried that immense weight of poverty straight into his coming-of-age years. And let me tell you, the external world was not kind to his ambition. The sheer, relentless grind of his youth meant that while other kids were hanging out after school, playing sports, just being kids, Ethan was working. At age 10, he's moving into that tiny apartment. Throughout his teenage years, he's in back rooms washing dishes and delivering groceries just to help them survive. And moving into adulthood, he's working these grueling physical shifts stocking shelves at a small store. His entire youth was just completely consumed by part-time jobs.
And you know how it goes. When you are working that hard, from the absolute bottom, the noise starts. People around him began to voice their doubts. They'd look at him and say things like, "You're wasting your time."
But it didn't stop there. Then came, "You're not talented enough." Imagine hearing that day in and day out while you are just physically exhausted from stocking shelves all night.
And then, the absolute gut punch. People like you don't become successful. The psychological toll of hearing these voices on repeat is massive. I mean, psychology tells us that repetitive negative reinforcement can literally rewire a young brain. And the sad part is, for a while, Ethan actually believed them. The noise got inside his head, and he believed the naysayers.
Chapter 3. The Mindset Shift, the Turning Point.
Okay, this right here is where the entire narrative pivots. One night, after another exhausting shift, Ethan comes home to find his father sitting at the kitchen table. He slides something across the table, an old envelope containing a small amount of saved money. This was literally everything his father could scrape together. It was a literal and figurative investment in his son. When Ethan looked confused and tried to hand it back, telling his dad he needed the money more than he did, his father just smiled.
And he said this, "I need you to believe in yourself more than I need this money." Wow, what an incredible emotional catalyst. This unconditional belief from his father acted as the exact spark Ethan desperately needed. It cut right through all that noise and all those voices of doubt we were just talking about.
That single night triggered a massive, massive psychological pivot. Instead of constantly asking himself, "What if I fail?" Ethan flipped the script. He started asking, "What if I actually succeed?" Changing this one simple question altered his entire trajectory. From that moment on, he started studying every single night. He learned new skills. And yeah, he failed again and again, but the text is incredibly clear on this point. Every single time he failed, he got right back up.
Section 4. Coming Full Circle, the Interview and Beyond.
So years pass. Ethan has put in the work, and he walks into a high-stakes job interview at a major company. The pressure is on. I'm talking dozens of highly talented, highly educated people competing for this exact same position. The interviewer looks right at him, across the desk, and asks the classic high-pressure question, "Why should we hire you?" Think about the tension in that room for a second. Everything Ethan has fought for since he was a 10-year-old kid in that tiny apartment comes down to this exact moment.
Ethan paused. He smiled, and he delivered this incredible answer. Because I know what it feels like to have nothing and still keep going. According to the text, the room went completely silent. They felt the absolute weight of his lived experience. And a few days later, the phone rings. He got the job.
And that job was really just the starting line. After landing the role, he used that experience, learned everything he could, and eventually founded his very own successful company years later. But here is the most beautiful moment in this entire source material. The very first person he hired to work at his new company was his father, the man who always believed in him.
One evening, they were standing together outside the company building. His dad looked up at the huge sign above the entrance and whispered, "I knew you could do it." And Ethan, smiling through his tears, replied, "No, Dad, you taught me how to do it." He redirected all that praise right back to his father's foundational teachings from back when they had absolutely nothing. Our final section, your greatest chapter, the universal application.
So what does this all mean for us? The core truth you have got to remember is this: your beginning does not decide your ending. That is the ultimate lesson Ethan never forgot, and it's the central thesis you need to hold on to when facing your own adversity. Where you start is just data, okay? It is not your final destination.
Look, we are pulling this directly from the source material's conclusion, and honestly, it just speaks so deeply to the reality of the human experience. You may be struggling today. You might literally be broke. You may feel like you are falling completely behind everyone else, and you may absolutely have people telling you that you're never going to make it. It is so important to validate that hardship because it is real and it is heavy.
But listen to me. A difficult chapter is not the whole story. To build that resilience, the blueprint from Ethan's life is actually remarkably simple. Keep learning, keep working, and keep believing. Because sometimes the person who feels like they have lost absolutely everything is actually just standing at the very beginning of their greatest chapter.
Which leaves us with this final, stark thought from the text to end on today. Your story isn't over yet. So ask yourself, if your beginning doesn't dictate your ending, what are you going to write in your next chapter?